Chapter 1. The scorching sun shined through William's half-open window, and the brightness of its rays woke him up to another ordinary day. William's first thought was one of gratitude, since the downstairs neighbor's cat had not woke him up by meowing during the night. He appreciated that he was well rested. William often fed the neighbor's cat outside his door, and he would repeat this tradition on this day. Not because he felt obliged, but since he loved watching the cat eat his grocery store-bought canned tuna. Even though he did not own the cat, and thereby it was not his responsibility to feed it, he loved that cat for reasons he could not explain. The cat usually hissed at him at first sight in the morning, but when he took out the tuna it became tame and did not mind him watching. When the cat had finished eating, it did not spend a second staying to get pets from William. He always imagined that the cat had big plans for each day, and that is why it was always so busy. He wondered often about how life would be as a cat, not because he was not satisfied with his own life, but since he was always interested in others' point of view. William's mind sprung into a séance of wild adventures, running through fields and tight spaces, grand cat societies, dangerous encounters with dogs. After William had stopped daydreaming and the cat had ran away, he closed his door and sat down by the window in his chair to read in one of his books. He had a small library, and he often bought new books when he had finished the others. He always pursued new knowledge not because he especially driven to become a smart person, but instead he enjoyed understanding new concepts. He often wrote private study notes about different subjects that seemed to have a common relationships, as he was intrigued by the correlation of different fields of thought. This was his passion. In that way, he was devoted to creating new knowledge out of recombining his pre-existing knowledge just as much as he was devoted to gaining knowledge from others. Again, his devotion was not to accumulate, but to reinvent himself. He did not feel the need to become anyone in particular. He just flowed along with whatever knowledge he read and came to his mind. He had read in one of his many books that 98% of the atoms in his body would be replaced in a year, and therefore he was aware of the impermanence of all things, though it did not bother him. He was positive that life would go on without him many years from now, and though his existence was important, it was not essential for life as a whole to continue. He was also aware that his own awareness, the witness of his being, was constant like a light source, and he found peace in that knowing. He was fully aware that he was aware. William had a friend named Henry. William would often try to discuss his findings with Henry when they met, but was often met with misunderstanding and outright denial. William's aim was receiving feedback not to defend his position, but to refine his ideas so that his work would not contain errors, since that could bring about false information in later reconfiguration iterations. Henry was deeply conditioned, and his truth came only from what he perceived as authorities. His beliefs were borrowed and not subject to debate. He was deeply structured, and when William were to present his findings, Henry felt like he lost control of the situation, as he generally felt uncomfortable with unfamiliar information. William and Henry had arranged a meeting that day at a local cafe. William was excited to share his recent findings with Henry, and he was unperturbed by Henry's routinely rejection, as William was not expecting any particular reaction. Before William went out, he put his book back in the shelf and went to sit down for a few minutes in silence. He was grateful he lived uptown, since there was relatively quiet from traffic there, so he could just enjoy the silence. He was not trying to think about anything or trying to come up with new findings. Whenever a thought would arise anyway, he would acknowledge it, but let it pass on like fallen leaves passing down a stream of water, without judgment or attachment. At the same time, Henry was driving in his car as he had departed from downtown. Traffic was heavy, and all the traffic lights seemed to be red, which made Henry impatient, since he was really looking forward to going to the cafe. He could not get the particular kind of coffee he was going to order out of his mind, since he kept reminding himself. All the times he had been late to a meeting passed through his mind, and he became frustrated. He was hoping that he could make it there in time so he would not be embarrassed. He thought to himself how unfortunate he is. As Henry is about to burst, the traffic starts to loosen up, and it seems he might make it in time. He thinks to himself how lucky after all he is that he did not leave downtown early, as he would have gotten to the cafe much before they had planned to meet. Henry parked his car and started walking towards the cafe. On the way, a tourist couple asked for direction to a city attraction, but Henry ignored them as he wanted to be there on time for his meeting. He looked at his watch and figured he might as well stand in the alley a bit since they had planned to meet in a few minutes. He spent these minutes not in silence, but looking at news on his phone. As he walked out the alley yard, he immediately spotted William, who was already sitting at a table outside the cafe. William had not ordered yet and was waiting patiently. Henry greeted William and sat down next to him. Before William could respond, Henry had already called over a waitress to order the coffee he had on his mind all day. William ordered a cup of tea. William asked Henry if the traffic was heavy, and Henry denied that it was and that he had hit all the green lights on the way. William smiled at Henry and felt grateful that he had a safe journey. Henry proceeded to gossip about how some of his friends had bought tickets for a concert later that month. He bragged about how one of them knew a stage technician and that the friends could see the band backstage after the concert. William seemed unbothered and said that it was good for them and asked if they were their favorite band. Henry dismissed the band as their favorite, but emphasized that it was a very famous band. Then William told Henry that he had learned some things about epistemology, the study of knowledge, since last time they had spoken together. Henry was confused over William not being excited about his friends going to the concert, and he was sincerely not excited to get a lecture in epistemology when all he wanted was to gossip about his friends. William proceeded to claim that modern neuroscience suggests that the brain operates on predictive coding. It continually generates models of the world and compares incoming sensory data to its expectations. Learning happens when there is a mismatch or prediction error between the model and the data. The brain must reorganize itself to reduce error, thereby seeing in a new way. It suggests that most new knowledge is indeed a sophisticated reconfiguration, reinterpretation, or novel application of existing concepts and descriptive frameworks. Our minds are constantly trying to make sense of the world by fitting it into what they already know. Henry told William that he was too caught up with his studies and that he overthought everything. Henry dismissed that learning was a reorganization, but instead that learning happens when the teacher educated the students. However, William expanded by telling Henry that when we acquire new knowledge, it often involves either assimilation, like seeing a new type of dog and classifying it as dog, or accommodation, like seeing a whale for the first time and having to refine the category of fish or create a new one for mammal. William summed his findings up in a quote from Anais Nin: "We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are." This revelation by Nin expressed that our ability to create new knowledge was limited by the knowledge we already had. New knowledge was always created by extra and interpolation of existing knowledge. Henry dismissed this as pure nonsense and claimed that knowledge does not come from pre-existing knowledge in our brain. Henry claimed that knowledge only existed externally and reiterated that the knowledge were written inside the teacher's textbooks and that William could just go look it up if he wanted to gain new knowledge. William thought that Henry was a tough nut to crack open, but he did not give up that easily. William clarified that new knowledge was not necessarily a complete abandonment of his teacher's knowledge, but merely a refinement. He told Henry to imagine a cat. Every morning it expects the tuna, and when it gets it, it is happy. But if he offered it something else, something totally new, it would react differently because its cat brain model for breakfast would be wrong. It would have to adjust. He tried to convince Henry that this requires an internal adjustment of expectations, just like his brain makes a mini prediction for every green light he hit. And when the prediction was right, he did not even notice, but if it was wrong, that is when he felt that jolt of surprise. That is when he loses control, therefore he becomes uncomfortable. William picked off a piece from the bread on his plate. He put his hands behind his back and asked Henry to guess which hand the piece was. Henry guessed immediately that the piece was in his right hand, and William took out that hand and showed him his open palm where there was nothing. Henry claimed he was just unlucky, but then William took out his left hand and showed him that was empty too. William had dropped the piece on the ground behind his chair. Henry stared first at William's empty right palm, then at his empty left. A slow flush crept up his neck. He muttered again that he was just unlucky, still scanning the table as if the bread piece might magically reappear. William then explained that This experiment showed that he could not rely on his expectations, and in that moment, a flicker of past experiences crossed Henry's eyes. He felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. It was intolerable, and he began to feel sick. Henry frantically claimed that it was just a silly circus trick, and that William was trying to make a big philosophical point out of something that meant nothing. Henry told him that it was not about expectations, it was about whether the bread was in his hand or not. And it was not. He just pulled a fast one. Henry claimed it had gotten nothing to do with how his brain worked, or traffic, or any of his other theories. Henry leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively. His gaze flickered around the cafe, clearly seeking to change the subject, to find a solid, familiar conversational anchor. He brought up the concert tickets again. He told William that they should get tickets to the concert and meet the band backstage with his friends. William sighed over Henry's denial of his findings, but quickly moved on. He wanted to make Henry happy, so he agreed to join him at the concert. They agreed to meet outside the entrance to the concert. The rest of their conversation was about sports, which they had a common interest in. When it became too quiet, and they had no apparent topics to discuss, Henry felt uneasy and wrapped it up by finishing his coffee and politely thanked William for good company and said he was looking forward to meeting with him at the concert. William nodded as Henry left, and he stayed at the cafe to finish his tea alone. William was a bit relieved that their meeting was over a bit sooner than expected, since it was not yet evening, and he had time to visit his grandfather at the hospital before heading home to make dinner. His grandfather had been in a coma for many months, and his condition was not getting any better. As William stood beside him at the hospital bed, he reminisced about when he was younger, and his grandfather would tell him stories. Mostly stories about his life on his parents' farm, but William had a peaceful feeling associated with these stories. William would imagine how his grandfather would come up with brilliant ideas on how to pass the time as he was a kid. His grandfather had had a lot of wisdom to share, and William knew from his many stories that he was a very balanced person. William now looked at his grandfather and felt a sense of frustration that he rarely felt. How is it that this man in front of him, who was once active and responsive, has become a vegetable? He has no awareness of internal or external stimuli, and no response to internal or external conditions. He represents a completely passive state where there is neither perception nor reaction. William's frustration led him to a thought experiment. He strongly rejected the obvious fact that his grandfather had succumbed to this fate. William took it one step further. His frustration led him to reject all claims of truth. He would reject everything, including its opposite. He realized this point of view would not make sense from a logical standpoint, but he observed that the world kept on going as he took this stance. He realized that he was entitled to this viewpoint psychologically, even though it did not describe the fact of reality. Suddenly, he realized that to reject all facts is to also include rejecting the fact that he himself is rejecting all facts, making the stance self-contradictory. This is a clear logical contradiction, but psychological. Rejection does not depend on logic, so he was allowed to reject something that was undeniably true. He realized that psychological rejection is not concerned with coherence in the logical sense, but with attitude, will, and experience. He could feel rejection live. In rejection, without having to resolve that with intellectual harmony, he could reject something he knows is true. He could reject even the feeling of knowing. He could rebel against the act of affirmation itself. His investigational stance was not a logical argument. It was more like a phenomenological attitude or existential position. His psychological rebellion could be total, even when it defied logic. The thought of his own psychology not obeying the truth disturbed William. All his life he had sought to uncover facts about existence, but could he really trust that his beliefs were true knowledge? It seemed to him that the truth value of his beliefs could be arbitrary and maybe even unknowable. He shrugs off these thoughts for now, and instead focused on the great satisfaction he had gotten from his discoveries so far. The undecidability of his beliefs did not seem to change William's pursuit of knowledge. Therefore he left his grandfather, went home and sat in his chair to read in a book of his that he had not finished yet. As he was reading away the seed of limitation, which was planted in the back of his mind, kept getting watered by his unconscious questioning. How can I trust any knowledge? What is real outside of myself? What are my limitations? Henry had left the cafe meeting and walked to a nearby dry cleaner where he had left his suit a couple of days earlier. He handed his ticket for the suit over to the dry cleaner lady, and she found the suit, handed it over, and he paid the cost. On the walk back to his car, a sudden thought passed his mind. How was he sure that the lady had brought him the right suit back? There was a bunch of other suits at the dry cleaner, so was he sure that this suit belonged to him? He stopped up for a moment to contemplate. Firstly, he handed over his ticket, and immediately the dry cleaner lady returned a suit. The proximity of these two actions created a strong associative link for Henry. Specifically, the contiguity of the exchange reinforced the belief that this suit really belonged to him. Secondly, Henry perceived his act of handing over the ticket as the cause for receiving his suit. The dry cleaner's process is a direct, deterministic function. He input the ticket, which yielded the output, which presumably was the correct suit. Thirdly, he had used dry cleaners many times before, and each time, presenting a ticket had successfully resulted in getting his suit back. This repeated positive reinforcement strengthened his association between the act of dry cleaning and the accurate return of his suit. Fourthly, the suit itself resembled his actual suit in style, size, and color. Would it have been drastically different? His mind would have quickly picked up on the discrepancy. Because no such stark contrast was immediately present, he could not find any reason to dismiss this suit as his own. Henry concluded that the suit he had been given indeed belonged to him, as he could not find any reason why the dry cleaner would have handed him the wrong one. He trusted them, and his frequent visits only enhanced that trust. But in the back of his mind, a seed of freedom has already been planted. Could his dry cleaners make a mistake? Have they made mistakes before, and he did not notice due to the same associative reasoning? Was his inherent trust really to be trusted? Henry went to his car with his suit and drove home. On the way, he stopped at a drive-in to pick up some food for dinner. He yelled at the cashier for taking too long for preparing the order. He was in a hurry to get home because his favorite reality show was airing that night. He parked his car and rushed to open the door to his apartment. He took off his jacket and went to his sofa for eating and watching television. He was just in time for his favorite show to begin. Though the show was staged, he believed that the characters were real-life people and that they acted accordingly. He laughed when the characters played ignorant and held his breath when there was drama between characters. He indulged in his takeaway meal as his vision was locked on the screen. Television made Henry forget about anxieties for a while as he was sucked into the story that was told to him. He believed every second of the show to be authentic, so it gave him a gateway to experiencing how exciting life could be. He often complained to himself about how dull his life was, and he wished himself away to a party beach house where there he had no worries. When the show had finished, Henry felt empty inside. Now that the show was over, he could not help but think about a week from then where the next episode would air. He was so focused on the next week that he got so frustrated that the next episode would not air in that moment. He was so impatient, and he banged the table with his fist in frustration. Now he remembered how his life without the show felt, and it came creeping up on him. He felt mistreated by everyone and yelled that it was all their fault that he could not see the next episode in that moment. He thought this was his life, and nothing could ever change it. He was stuck waiting for the next episode so he could get high with excitement and ridicule the cast once again. After throwing the tantrum, Henry remembered that he had agreed to go to the concert with William. He went online to buy the ticket, and that is when he realized. The concert was held a week from now on the same night, which meant he would have to miss his favorite show. Henry paused and shivered. He thought about the upside of going to the show because he really wanted to be seen by his friends backstage with the famous band. He thought this would sharpen his image and make him look cool to the others. But the show ended on a cliffhanger, with lots of drama coming in the next episode. He felt like he was losing control due to the choice he had to make. He had to sacrifice one gratification for the other. Henry felt the weight of his friends ridiculing him for not meeting the band. He vividly imagined them talking for hours on end about the concert that he did not attend and how that made him feel left out. Henry felt he absolutely had to attend the concert to not make himself embarrassed, so he finally bought the ticket and swallowed his dissatisfaction. After he had read in his book, William decided it was time to cook some dinner. He opened his fridge and took out the ingredients and then turned on the stove. He enjoyed the smell and texture of the meal he was preparing in his frying pan. He was whistling while he cooked, and he was not in a hurry like he never was. When he was done, he poured the food onto a plate and sat down at his dining table to enjoy his meal. He thought the taste was delightful and praised it. He looked at the fragrant colors, and it smelled just how it looked. When he had finished his dinner, he gave a large burp as he was satisfied and contented with it. Then he opened the ticket sales page and bought a ticket for the concert next week. It was a quick and painless decision, as he was determined to make Henry happy by accompanying him. William knew how excited Henry was to meet the band, especially since it was most he talked about. William sent a text message to Henry to confirm that he had bought the ticket. Henry replied immediately and told William that they should be there early so that they got a good view of the concert stage. William replied, accepting to Henry's request. Now that was taken care of, William could move on from his thoughts about the concert and seemed to enjoy the present day he have had. Not recollecting, but feeling his current impression of the day was his mantra. Both William and Henry had gone to sleep, and as they were sleeping, their unconscious self watered their respective seeds. William was anxious in his sleep and dreamed about a book he wanted to read, but he could not open the book as if the pages were glued together. Suddenly, the book caught on fire, and he felt the heat from the book burning his hands. He went to cool his hands in a fountain, and then he saw his own reflection. Only this was a darkened mirror image with red eyes. He opened his mouth, and a long pointy tongue stuck out the mouth of the reflection. The reflection whispered the words, "Reject me and you annihilate." He fell backward in terror. He picked himself up and ran down a corridor towards a door as the walls were closing in on him. As he came close to the door, his vision was narrow and his heart was beating fast. He suddenly woke up sweating and his bed was drenched. Henry slept peacefully and dreamed he was flowing down a river suspended on the river bed. The branches of trees that stood on the shore was hanging over him, and the leaves shaded him from the sun as he was floating. He looked up at the glimmer that was created by the sun and the leaves moving in the soft wind. He flowed down to a valley as the river ended, and he stood up. He started walking to the top of a hill as his hands flowed through the tall grass. As he reached the top, the clouds disappeared from the sky and the sun's bright light shined on him. His feet left the ground and he began floating. Soon he could see the whole valley and the river stream he came down. He was floating in the sky, but he also felt like his dream had passed in an instant and that he was at every place at once. I felt a sense of belonging and wholeness that could not be described. Henry smiled as he started to fall into a deeper sleep.